Hey guys, Dead Ponic here. I just came home from seeing War of the Rohirrim. Holy fucking shit, this movie is absolutely fucking amazing. Like, seriously, an animated Lord of the Rings film that isn't tied to any of the major movies and is set before the events of the actual movies. It's insane. And it was backed by I guess it's a known Japanese animator, and he did such an amazing job. I'll get into my thoughts about that, but I want to clear up a couple things. I will be giving spoilers, and I will be talking about some behind the scenes stuff really quick. First of all, the image you see on your screen right now, the giant eagle, I believe that is supposed to be Gua here. I could be wrong. Feel free to correct me or not, but and one thing about this is that there's something about Helm Hammerhand that I didn't know, but apparently he's one of the 9 Nazgul. Now, according to Shadow of War, in one of the cutscenes that they have for his storyline, he actually got a ring of power. Well, actually, yeah, one of the 9 rings of power. And he was so blinded by anger and grief and all that he actually slew an entire. I believe it was something. I believe it was the Dunlings, sorry. And eventually he died and he was resurrected as a wraith. I could be wrong, but that's kind of contradictory to this storyline, but I'm willing to accept either or. But I know for a fact that Helm Hammerhead at some point, because he is one of the 9 men who actually has a ring of power, he actually he becomes a ring wraith at some point. Anyway, one thing they did also was they brought Miranda Otto, who plays Eowyn in the movies. They got her to do the narration, and I thought that was a really nice touch, and that was wonderful. Like, overall, this movie has some really good, strong voice acting. It's got some great animation, some amazing cutscenes, and I'll talk about the main character when I get to her. But suffice to say, it does tie into something related to A1, believe it or not. Alright, so let's talk animation and soundtrack. I'm going to put them in the same category. The soundtrack they use is obviously the Rohan soundtrack because it's focused on Rohan as a whole. And the opening little bit that they played in the first 3 movies, I believe, it's a really great little bit to bring you back into the world. I really enjoyed that. I particularly have an enjoyment for the Rohan soundtrack because it's very, it's very bombastic. It's also very filled with a lot of sorrow, and I just enjoy it so much. And they use it at the right moments. As for the animation, absolutely gorgeous. Like, you can't even tell that this is sometimes I made the mistake of thinking they were like matte paintings or just a little bit of CGI thrown in there. But the animation is absolutely gorgeous. Like, the character expressions, the landscape, even some of the monsters and creatures are absolutely wonderful. And this is translated also into the voice acting. The voice acting is very well done. I have to say that. I have to give compliments to that. I think the highlight for me is Brian Cox's Helm Hammerhand. He brings a surprising amount of presence, and he's also, he has that moment where he's kind of fallen from grace a little bit, and they make him human. Most of the characters in this story are very much human. The motivation behind the villain and the entire storyline is a very human thing, and I really enjoy that. And just some of the little things that I just enjoyed so much, and just it was absolutely wonderful. And I would not change a thing about this. Like, just bravo across the board. Like, the first opening bit, where the main character Hera, she is just riding along, and then she sees the big eagle, and then she pulls out a big thing of meat, and I'm like, are you seriously gonna eat that thing? And I'm like, oh, I see what she's doing. So she's giving it to the giant eagle. And I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, I know where this is going. Maybe. Okay, so story. What causes the War of the Rohirrim? Well, basically, Helm Hammerhand, the ninth king of Rohan, has called together all the lords of Rohan, and one of them is being a little bit prickly, we'll say. I believe his name is Freka. And he basically wants to marry his son Wolf, who is actually a friend of Hera, so that basically Wolf will take the throne when Helm dies. Well, they settle it relatively quickly, let's just say that. Basically what happens is Helm and Freka, they get into a little fist fight, and well, it only takes one strike from Helm to basically kill Freka, and it was like, wow, that's it? And well, Wolf's not happy about this, and he draws his blade, and Helm basically puts him in his place, and he says, well, you're banished. And this kind of leads to the events of the movie as a whole in terms of the war itself and the conflict. What I gotta say right here, this is definitely not how I was expecting Helm to be depicted. I always thought of Helm Hammerhand as kind of like a wise, gentle giant, but he's quite firm. And he basically says no to Hera, wanting to go to fight. And it was kind of a little hard to watch. But I also enjoyed that the two sons, one of them is named Hama, believe it or not. That's actually a character that's in the Two Towers. But I really like the cousin character. I forget his name. But I also really like the two brothers. They both go out one of them, basically what happens, one of the big action scenes of the movie is where a freaking Mumakil basically kind of wanders into the land, and Hera kind of leads it into what I presume to be Fangord Forest. And, well, things happen. Actually, a watcher on the water grabs the Mumakil and eats it, and then Hera gets captured and taken to Isengard. And this is before Saruman comes into the picture and takes, ownership of Isengard. And, well, basically this is kind of the point of no return for Wolf, because he's basically like, well, you've lied to me, you didn't really want to marry me, and I will not rest until I've killed your brothers, I've killed your father, and basically Rohan will bow to me. And, well, Edoras gets attacked, and there's the big showdown. Well, the first major showdown. And just like on the Pelennor Fields, well, basically Helm has his big speech, and he calls forth Aelengeth, and I'm like, yes, I knew they were going to do that. And they just charge right into the fray. It turns out one of the lords that pledged his loyalty to Helm ends up betraying him, and, well, the people have to flee. The brother, not Hama, when the Mumakil actually breaks through the gate of Edoras into the city, he actually kills it he has this big battle axe, and basically, well, Wolf shoots him with an arrow, and it was, Helm didn't take this very well, let's just say that. So, they go to Helm's Deep, they flee, and now they got to settle in for the long haul, and then that's where Hera runs into this old lady who's been there for such a long time, and she kind of explains a few things, which including the dress that Hera wears at the end of the movie, or at least at the end fight, is actually the same dress that Eowyn wears, along with the little circlet. It turns out this dress belonged to a bride who died the night before her wedding, which is a bad omen. And, well, things really escalate, and it turns out Wolf brought in a bunch of wild men, and he promised them a bunch of gold, and they're basically building a massive siege tower, and it's really good. The animation is really good. So one thing I didn't mention is that there's a little squire character. His name's Leaf. I am left to assume that he is a halfling of some kind. He could be. I don't know. He might just be just a. It's hard to tell. But basically, he's in charge of keeping like the sigils alive, and he discovers the sigil of the Shield Maidens. And one of these Shield Maidens, who's still alive, is Olwen, who is basically the, I guess you could say, advisor to Hera. She basically tries to keep her safe as best she can. And basically, they flee to Helm's Deep, and then Wolf basically, Hama actually, like, stays behind. And another thing I really like is that he has this little loot that he entrusts to Hera that she takes with her. Anyway, he stays behind. Later on, it turns out he got captured instead of getting killed. But then he's brought before the causeway of Helm's Deep, which still looks really good. Like, it's pretty accurate to the film itself. But basically, Wolf, he's gone. Like, there's no reasoning with this guy anymore. And he kills Hama in front of Helm and Hera. And, this causes Helm to go mad with grief. So much so that during the winter, the story goes, or at least what they describe, is basically after 3 blows of the horn, he would slaughter like a bunch of the troops. And, it leads the Wildmen to believe that Helm Hammerhead has turned into a wraith. Turns out, Hera kind of basically snapped him out of his grief. And she's discovered the caves within Helm's Deep and the back entrance that goes into the mountains that's mentioned in 2 towers. She comes across 2 orcs and a troll, and she gets saved by Helm. And Helm takes this the orcs down, and the troll with his bare hands, and a rock. And then they flee back to the gates, and Helm basically, he goes out like a boss. Like, seriously. He takes down so many guys, and then it cuts to the next scene where it shows him that he's just frozen solid. He probably most likely died, he probably just froze to death. And it was like, my God, what a last stand. And it seems like hope has just diminished completely. And this is where Hera comes up with her harebrained scheme to basically get help. Her cousin is actually a done hero, and he's kind of lost hope, and he's about to pack up. So she basically has her Squire Leaf get the Helm's armor and, his hammer, and basically bring it to the highest point of Helm's Deep. And so basically she climbs to the top of the mountain and runs into the giant eagle, and basically beseeches the eagle to help her out. And this is the critical moment, which I thought was really good. And and then, Wolf is struggling to keep his army together. And then they decide, okay, we're going to evacuate, and we're going to head through the mountains, and the soldiers and the Shield Maidens will stay behind. So that's what happens. And Hera says, if he wants a bride so badly, let's give him one. And so she dons the dress and the circlet, and it's such an incredible moment. Okay, so the final fight of the movie, where Hera actually goes on her horse, she has the armor, the dress on, she has the circlet, and she makes a defiant last stand. This right here was the defining moment for her character, and this is what I suspected they were trying to recreate, something along the lines of Eowyn, but I am just so impressed. And they don't go they don't put any regular BS when it comes to fights between a man and a woman. In fact, the gender element is taken out completely, because in a flashback scene we see that these two as kids were actually play fighting and practicing, and turns out the scar that Wolf gets on his face was from Hera, and that was an accident. And basically she basically challenges them to a fight. They joust, and they end up in an actual sword fight, and it's it's just such a lovely, it's a great fight. The animation is great. And also, well, she basically bests him, but then he basically, he has to keep his word after his general says, hey, don't do this, it's over. He ends up killing him. And then, well, things just escalate from there until the cousin wearing the Helm's armor along with his riders appear over the hill, just like in Two Towers with Gandalf. We'll get to him in a minute, but basically, and then he cries forth Aelingus, and I'm like, oh god, they're coming down the hill, and I'm like, oh, you guys are so screwed. And well, Hera doesn't kill Wolf with a sword. She actually does it with the buckler that Olwen, her I guess her advisor, I guess you could say like a, not like a personal assistant, you could say. She basically, like Captain America throws that thing, she catches it and basically kills him with it. And it's like, yep, that'll do it. And so she tells her cousin, show mercy, let them go back to their homes and their families. And he says, all right, well, mercy has been given this day. And so Edoras is rebuilt, and we get, believe it or not, Saruman. Saruman comes into the picture here for a little bit. And obviously it's Christopher Lee, and he's been, they used archival footage of his voice, which I thought was fine. I mean, it's great having Saruman here, and it's accurate to the lore that he would, take ownership of Isengard. But then Hera basically, she gets a letter from a wizard, and it has Gandalf's marking. If you know your book lore, if you read the books, you'll know this is what he does in The Hobbit. Anyway, she actually, says his name is, in the common tongue, his name is Gandalf. And so Olwen and Hera ride off, and that's the movie. So overall, this movie was just absolutely wonderful to watch. I loved every minute of it. It was great. There were some really high moments. There was very little in terms of low moments. I was on the edge of my seat. I had happy tears. I was just in such awe of the just animation itself. The fact that they made an animated Lord of the Rings movie, because the last time they did that was so long ago, I don't even remember who actually made it. But basically, I highly recommend you go see this movie. And if you want solid action, great character moments, great story, wonderful voice acting, this is the movie right here. Now, stay tuned. I will be probably talking about Sonic 3 at some point if I go see it. I'm probably going to go see it anyway. But just, I love this movie. I would go see it 30 times if I could. Especially because the thing as I mentioned before, Hera's dress that she wears near the end of the movie is actually the same dress that I believe Eowyn wears. I could be wrong. But it's also interesting that Eowyn and Hera are redheads, which I thought was an interesting little touch. Now, as to some weird lore things, I do believe that Helm does eventually become a ring wraith, but I can't prove it within the context of this movie. But because Shadow of War is its own continuity and its own telling of these stories of what happened to the 9 Kings of Men, I suspect that they're kind of eyeballing it, if you will. But yeah, that's my very, very long review of War of the Rohirrim. Definitely worth seeing. I would definitely say it does have blood, and it does have a little bit of a mature element, so I don't know if you should take your kids, but definitely go see it. Anyway, stay tuned for my next video. This is Dead Punic, signing off.